When you look at like a truly stunning architectural blueprint, there's a certain kind of cold perfection to it, right? It's
Mm,
all these uh, precise angles and, stark white lines on blue paper, just perfectly mapped out geometry.
yeah, exact.
But for all its perfection, I mean, you cannot live inside a blueprint. You
Yeah.
can't just walk through the front door. And you certainly can't, warm your hands over a two-dimensional drawing of a fireplace.
No, because a blueprint is entirely theoretical. It represents this flawless idea of a house, but it completely lacks physical mass.
Right.
It lacks friction and the literal gravity of a real home. It's just pure potential that's waiting for a catalyst.
Right. And getting from those crisp white lines on the paper to a physical house made of brick and mortar where you can actually strike a match and start a fire, I mean, that gap is massive.
It is.
And today we are looking at the exact mechanism that bridges that gap.
Yeah.
We're doing a deep dive into the esoteric architecture of the universe, and our guide is this modern curriculum from Ben Hod.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're looking at Map 3, Unit 1 of his course, which meticulously unpacks a notoriously dense masterwork from 1856 by the French occultist Eliphas Levi.
Right. The dogme et rituel de la haute magie.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover what Levi calls the law of three, or the ternary. Because, in this specific context, magic has absolutely nothing to do with pulling rabbits out of hats or waving a wand.
No, not at all. It's much closer to engineering, really.
Right.
Levi treats magic as the study of an exact, almost mechanical process through which abstract, invisible power is forced to become tangible reality.
Wow.
It's basically the physics of creation.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the foundational math of Levi's universe. And I'm actually struggling with a massive leap he makes right out of the gate.
Okay.
Levi essentially claims that the number 2, the binary, is a trap.
Hmm.
But I mean, most philosophies we encounter celebrate duality.
Yeah.
We love the concept of yin and yang, light and dark, the balance of opposites. So why does Levi view the binary as a fundamental problem?
Well, to understand his hostility toward the binary, you have to look at the metaphysical algebra he inherited. So Levi is pulling from classical Neoplatonic thinkers like Proclus and later French philosophers like Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin.
Okay.
So let's visualize it. Think of a single point in space, the monad.
Sure.
It represents unmanifest potential. It's entirely silent, static, and alone.
Just sitting there.
Right. It just sits there doing nothing. But now, introduce a second point in space. You've just created a binary.
Like a line connecting two extremes.
Exactly. But look at the physics of a simple line between two opposing points. It's a realm of harsh, unyielding dualism. You have up and down, spirit and matter, active and passive, and Levi argues that in this state, you don't get a harmonious dance.
You did.
No. You get a Mexican standoff, you get endless opposition, friction, and just an agonizing tug of war.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, two forces that are equally matched, pulling against each other, that leads either to complete stasis, because they cancel each other out, or to mutual destruction. Nothing new is actually created in a pure binary. It's just perpetual conflict.
Okay, so you need a tiebreaker.
You need a third vector. Yeah, it's only when a third point is introduced that the tension of the straight line is broken, pulled upward or downward, and resolved into a triangle.
Oh, I see.
A triangle is the first geometric shape that actually encloses space. So the ternary is the engine that forces those two warring opposites into a stable geometric creation.
Which brings us into this incredibly complex concept from the sources, which is linguistic Kabbalah and the idea of the verb.
Yes.
Levi leans heavily on the Greek concept of the logos, or a Latin verbum, right? The spoken word is the ultimate creative force. But he breaks this creative verb down into 3 distinct mechanical parts.
He does.
You have the intelligent principle, which the source maps to the Hebrew chokmah. Then there's the expressive principle, mapped to Bina. And finally, the spoken principle, which is Malkuth. Can you walk us through how these actually interact? Because the text gets very dense right here.
Sure. Let's follow the flow of energy. The intelligent principle, chokmah, is the primordial spark. It's the raw, unshaped electrical impulse of an idea.
Okay.
But a spark without a container just dissipates into the void.
Right, it just fades.
Exactly. It needs resistance to take form. That is where the expressive principle Bina comes in. Bina acts as the matrix, the mold, the geometric boundary that catches that raw spark and gives it a specific shape.
I kept picturing a 3D printer while I was reading this section.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it maps so perfectly. The intelligent principle is the designer's raw idea just floating in their head, so completely silent and unmanifest. But to make it real, they have to put it into CAD software. That CAD file is the expressive principle. It takes the invisible idea and gives it strict mathematical boundaries and a mold. But even then, I mean, you can't hold a CAD file in your hand.
No, you
Can't just
can't.
data on a screen.
It remains trapped in the realm of the blueprint.
Exactly. It's only when you activate the spoken principle, Malkuth, which in this analogy is the extruder on the printer physically laying down hot plastic layer by layer into the physical world. That's when the idea actually becomes a tangible object you can pick up. Spark, mold, reality.
What's fascinating here is the etymology behind the very origin of that raw idea, long before it even reaches the mold. Levi refers to this origin point as the absolute.
Okay.
Now, in modern conversation, we use absolute to mean total or complete. But the word comes from the Latin absolutus, which literally translates to untied, unloosed, or severed from all conditionality.
Wow, severed.
Yeah. In the Kabbalistic tradition Levi is drawing from, this is the Ein Sof, the limitless infinite void. It is completely inaccessible to human cognition because to comprehend something is to put a limit on it.
Makes sense.
So the absolute remains entirely untied from human reality until it condenses into a specific vibration, a word.
But the source material makes a really bold claim about that word. It says that the real magic, the actual ternary engine, doesn't happen simply because a word is vibrating in the air.
Right. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, is it magic? Levi would say no.
Okay.
The magic requires a collision. When the unmanifest absolute is uttered as a word, it is meaningless without a receiver. The moment a human intellect grasps that utterance, a profound alchemy occurs. The source text describes it beautifully. A third itself is forged in the furnace of perception.
A third itself. Man, that is such a striking phrase.
It is. It's the child born of the union between the transcendent invisible source and the physical immanent symbol. It becomes a living psychological force that is now shaped by human intention. That collision in the listener's mind is the ternary engine in motion.
So if the universe builds reality through this mechanical flow, from an untied spark into a structured mold, colliding into physical reality, how does a human being actually operate this machinery?
Well, that's the big question.
Right, because grasping the theory is one thing, but Levi is talking about applied practice. What powers the printer?
This is where Levi introduces his defining metaphor of the sun. To operate the machinery, you have to understand the sequence of power. Levi explains that the sun itself is the hidden central origin.
Okay.
But a hidden origin is purely theoretical until it casts something outward. So the sun casts light. Light represents intellectual revelation. It illuminates the geometry of the universe and makes the hidden center visible to the mind.
Right, and the source shares this amazing, very grounded anecdote about that exact metaphor. The writer talks about auditing a Catholic RCIA class, a class for adults converting to Catholicism, years ago.
Yeah.
And the instructor in this suburban church used this exact same metaphor, the sun, its light, and its heat, to explain the Christian Trinity to newcomers.
That's a great connection.
It really is. It shows how Levi isn't just inventing occult concepts in a vacuum. He is bridging incredibly abstract ancient theology with these mechanical, esoteric principles. And I should note for the listener, we're just reporting on how these concepts mirror each other mechanically, not taking any stance on the theology itself.
Of course.
But back to the metaphor, the sun is the hidden source. Light is the revealing intellect. But heat is something else entirely.
Heat is the physical kinetic force, and that transition from the intellectual revelation of light to the tangible force of heat is the crux of Levi's entire magical system.
Really?
Yeah, because to a true operator, mere sight, just seeing the light and understanding the theory, is a passive trap.
I want to push back on the listener for a second here, and honestly, I had to confront myself while reading this too, because if we are honest, we are all incredibly guilty of accumulating what Levi would call cold light.
Oh, definitely.
We read endless articles, we listen to deep dives, we study ancient symbols, we hoard terabytes of data on our hard drives, we possess all the light in the world, but we never generate the heat of action. We understand the world perfectly, but we don't actually change our environment.
You've just diagnosed what we could call the danger of the library. Levi was writing in mid-19th century Paris, surrounded by extremely erudite intellectuals.
Right.
And one of his contemporaries was a man named Joseph Hoane Wronski. Wronski was a brilliant mathematician and philosopher who mapped out these same esoteric ideas using terrifyingly complex, sweeping algebraic formulas.
Sounds exhausting.
It was. Wronski's work was notoriously dry. It was purely academic. Levi fundamentally rejected that approach. For Levi, magic must be an exothermic reaction.
Exothermic, meaning it physically has to give off heat to its surroundings.
It has to change the temperature of the room.
Yeah.
Just look at the linguistics Levi employs. He frequently uses the word manifest. Now, we throw that word around so casually today.
Oh, yeah. I'm manifesting a new job, or I'm manifesting a parking spot.
Right, usually implying some vague, passive wishful thinking. But manifest traces back to the Latin manifestus, which literally means caught by the hand or struck by the palm.
Struck by the palm. Man, that is aggressively physical.
It's a collision. He isn't talking about daydreaming on a couch. He's talking about an invisible essence becoming so dense, so real, that you can physically collide with it.
Wow.
And he pairs it with the word effective, from the Latin efficere, meaning to work out or to produce fully. Light might reveal the architectural geometry of the universe, but heat is what actually cooks the ingredients inside the crucible. Magic is the act of forcing the physical world to yield to your temperature.
Okay, but heat doesn't exist in a vacuum. If magic is a physical force that creates heat, the operator has to be physically grounded somewhere to channel it.
They do.
So where does Levi actually put the magician in this equation? Let's get into his spatial mapping, because the geometry he uses to anchor the operator is wild.
It is. Levi maps the cosmos using an invisible macrocosmic architecture. He starts by drawing a massive triangle in the sky. At the very top is the zenith, an apex of infinite height that connects directly to the divine source.
Okay.
This zenith is attached by two diverging lines that pull down to the horizon below, the Orient and the Occident.
East and west.
Exactly. The Orient from Oriens, the rising sun representing the dawn, the active, expansive, masculine principle, and the Occident from Occidens, the falling sun representing dusk, passive reception, and concrete form.
You know, when I was reading this spatial map, I immediately pictured the central pillar of a massive suspension bridge.
Oh, that's a good image.
Yeah, because if you were the operator standing on that baseline horizon between east and west, between the active push and the passive pull, there's an incredible amount of sheer mechanical tension.
Absolutely.
If you lose your anchor to the infinite apex above you, the zenith, you fall entirely into the warring dualities of the baseline. You get ripped apart by the tension of the binary. You have to hold the tension of the apex to keep the bridge standing.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The operator is the central pillar. And Levi argues that human reason, which comes from the Latin ratio, fundamentally meaning computation, proportion, and balance.
Right.
It dictates that this visible sky triangle must have an invisible subterranean twin.
The classic Hermetic law.
Right.
As above, so below.
Right. The highest spiritual summit must plunge into the deepest baseline of matter. When you intersect the upward-pointing triangle of spirit with the downward-pointing triangle of matter, you get the classic six-pointed star, the Seal of Solomon, the hexagram.
And here's where I was genuinely confused.
Nice, that.
Because the source points out a glaring historical contradiction in Levi's own text. Levi explicitly calls this six-pointed star the Great Pentacle. But, I mean, anyone who has taken basic geometry knows that penta means 5. A pentagram has 5 points.
Yeah.
So why on earth is this meticulous occultist calling a six-pointed hexagram a pentacle? Did you just make a massive typo?
It wasn't a typo. It's an etymological trap that has confused modern readers and esoteric students for over a century. Yeah. The word pentacle in the medieval grimoire tradition does not actually derive from the Greek word pente for 5.
Okay.
It comes from the Middle French panicle, which traces back to the Latin root pende, meaning to hang.
To hang. Like a pendulum or a pendant swinging from a chain?
Precisely that. In classical magic, a pentacle was simply any talisman, a metal disc, a ring, a piece of inscribed parchment that hung around the operator's neck or was suspended over an altar.
Oh, wow.
Regardless of whether it had 4, 6, or 8 points, it is an engine suspended across the abyss. And Levi is making a radical metaphysical point by using this term.
Which is?
In his era, the 5-pointed star, the pentagram, represented the microcosm, humanity, the 5 senses, the physical body.
The individual person standing in the center of the bridge.
Yes. So the 6-pointed hexagram represents the macrocosm, the divine universal law of the cosmos. By calling the hexagram the Great Pentacle, Levi is stating that the operator, who is a five-pointed microcosm in skin and bone, must mentally and spiritually wear the six-pointed macrocosm like a pendant. They must suspend themselves in the divine geometry to achieve a perfect mirror of cosmic equilibrium. The human will has to perfectly map onto the cosmic law to generate true heat.
The operator has to become the living bridge between those two reflecting mirrors.
Exactly.
So if this is the macrocosmic architecture, this grand geometry of stars and apexes, how does it apply to everyday human life?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
The source transitions into how this structure lives inside human language and ultimately inside human tragedy. Let's look at what Levi calls the grammar of Genesis.
So Levi writes that the infinite prince, when initiating creation, speaks of himself to himself. It turns the theological concept of the Trinity into a mathematical and grammatical necessity.
Okay, how so?
Think about the basic structure of human grammar. You have the first person, the speaker. Now, the root of the word person is persona, which was the theatrical mask through which a classical actor's voice would sound. The first person is the ego mask, projecting intention into the void.
That maps to the intelligent principle we talked about earlier, the raw spark.
It does. Then you have the second person, the receiver, the mirror, the you being spoken to. Because you cannot speak into a vacuum. You require a polarity, a point of resistance to receive the force of the voice.
Right.
And finally, you have the third person, the he, she, or it about whom we speak, the materialized reality. The third person is the tangible downstream consequence of the dialogue between the first and second person.
That is the spoken principle, the resulting heat.
If we pull back to look at the macro perspective, Levi says this universal law of three governs everything.
Everything.
In alchemy, you have a Zolf, the universal primordial solvent, followed by incorporation into a physical resistant container, and finally the transmutation of the material. In the architecture of the human soul, it is thought, love, and action.
I want to slow down here because the source text provides an incredibly solemn, devastating emotional anchor to ground all of this high-minded esoteric theory.
It really does.
The writer shifts away from alchemy and stars to talk about the ultimate human ternary, the family unit, father, mother, and child. And they share a very personal, heavy anecdote about a mother passing away, leaving behind a father and a 9-year-old daughter. So what does this all mean? How does 19th century occult architecture apply to a grieving family?
It is perhaps the most profound application of Levi's law in the entire text. When death tears the mother away, it creates a massive void in the center of the equation. You have the father on one side, the initial principle, the intent to protect and guide.
Yeah.
And you have the child on the other side, the potential, the future fulfillment. But the circuit is completely broken. The dyad is left in a state of paralyzing, static grief.
They are reduced to those two solitary points in space. They're caught in the trap of duality.
And just as we discussed with the straight line, that binary state is agonizing. They're separated by an abyss. But Levi's law of correspondences states that when a physical pillar vanishes, the operator must look to parallel planes to bridge the gap. In the realm of the human soul, the dynamic middle factor, the bridge between an internal thought and an external action, is love. To heal the rupture, the father cannot afford to just survive emotionally.
You can't just be static.
No, he cannot remain a static point. He must become the active middle factor himself. He must actively and mechanically incarnate love.
He has to translate abstract, paralyzing grief into daily physical devotion.
Okay.
He has to literally manufacture the heat.
Yes. He must alchemize his own pain into structural strength. Levi writes an incredibly poignant line. We search for another to become two in order to become three.
Wow.
Polarity, two grieving people merely existing in the same house, is sterile. It does nothing until a spark leaps between them to ignite a third reality.
Right.
Love, in this esoteric context, isn't just a passive feeling of affection. It is a grueling, active, ternary engine. It is the verb that rescues the child from the static void and brings a functional redemption to a shattered world.
That is so incredibly heavy, but it's also deeply actionable. It takes this dense, algebraic occult theory from 1856 and proves that it's actually a blueprint for surviving the darkest, most agonizing parts of human existence.
It really is.
Because when you find yourself stuck in a binary trap, whether that's a fiercely polarized political argument, a creative project that is completely frozen, or profound inner turmoil and grief, you are lacking the ternary.
You are.
You're stuck at the number two. You need to find the verb, the active third element, to turn that painful friction into forward momentum. You cannot just observe the light. You have to actively project the heat.
And this raises an important question, especially for us living in the modern world. Levi places all of this immense power in the spoken principle and the conscious use of human language, grammar, and the verb as the literal magical mechanism that shapes physical reality. The infinite prince creates by speaking.
The word is the physical act.
So what happens to human agency when we begin to wholesale outsource our writing, our speaking, and our very thinking to artificial intelligence? If the act of spoken word is the central pillar connecting us to the divine, are we severing our own connection to the zenith? If we willingly hand the ternary engine of creation over to machines, do we lose our fundamental ability to project human heat, leaving ourselves to wander indefinitely in a world of entirely cold light?
That is a terrifying and entirely necessary question. I think that is something we all need to chew on as we go about our day. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.